Resident Evil 4 is considered as one of the best survival horror games of all time, and with many considering the original 2004 version as the peak of the series. As loved as the entry is though, its development is notorious for having been a messy endeavour for the devs, with many scrapped plans and redirects in its story as well as its gameplay. In this video, we're going to be going over many of the key prototype builds for Resident Evil 4, and as always, a like would be extremely appreciated if you do learn anything new or simply enjoyed the video. And without wasting any more time, let's jump right into it. Biohazard 4 prototype is an informal term used to describe the various prototype stages for Resident Evil 4. Work on the game began in 2000 following internal changes to an existing game of the same name, and it was officially announced in 2001. Development ran into reoccurring problems with both the need to be technologically ambitious and revitalize the series, and ultimately the game that was released in 2005 was very different from the earlier builds. The first of these builds is Castle, and this is the prototype most true to the original pitch, itself being a reworking of the stylish build of the previous Resident Evil 4 project, which would go on to become the Devil May Cry series. The project was led by Yasuhisa Kawamura, I might have butchered that name, I probably did, and also Hiroshi Shibata, based on a pitch that would see Leon invade Umbrella HQ. The story would uncover more about the progenitor virus and how it was isolated within the mummified remains of a superhuman who ruled over a vast kingdom in ancient times, as well as a plan by Oswell E. Spencer, a series mainstay villain, to gain immortality through it. In the game's opening, US Stratcom was about to attack Umbrella HQ at the same time as Albert Wesker's HCF, leading to both factions being wiped out with the exception of Leon S. Kennedy, who would be infected with a retrovirus and slowly mutate over the course of the game. Along the way, Leon was to meet up with a mysterious woman who was imprisoned within its labs and is protected by a trained BOW dog, which I assume would be a virus-related mutation for the dog that's somehow linked to the owner, you could call it, of this trained BOW dog, which isn't too far-fetched nowadays in the Resident Evil series, as we did get the animated movie where there was that guy who was able to control the lickers based on the infection within his own body. So it wasn't too far-fetched. Of course, at the time this would have been a first, but swiftly moving on, technology-wise, the game was intended to use the GameCube's full resource capabilities, with each area being rendered fully in 3D like Resident Evil Code Veronica, rather than using the pre-rendered backgrounds from the original trilogy. One of the most important enemies of the game would have been the Black Fog, which was a floating mass of tentacles which was to infect Leon. Capcom was unable to develop realistic and resource-light animations for the enemy, forcing Shibata to oversee changes in how the game would appear. The only footage we have of this prototype build is in the TGS 2002 trailer. This castle script was then later handed over to Studio 2 for Haunting Ground, which kept its focus on the girl, her dog, and her relationship with the villain, with the complete removal of Leon S. Kennedy. And this would bring us on to the next prototype build that was codenamed, and it would be an evolution of the castle build, which offered a radical change in how the game would be experienced, with Kawamura pitching a more psychological game with hallucinatory enemies instead of mutants. The story itself was the same as that of the castle build, though the script was to be rewritten to better establish the change in situation. The only footage of this build was released at TGS 2003. This version of the game was based around a complicated mechanic where two versions of a room would load each time, one in the real world and one in the hallucination world containing the enemies. And by choosing this mechanic, the player would instantly cross between worlds when crossing a checkpoint without having an additional loading sequence. And as cool as this does sound, of course it being a massive innovation technologically speaking at the time that this game was being developed, this would become the game's downfall, as of course this was quite a task for the GameCube to handle, and the GameCube simply was not powerful enough to load all necessary assets. With this experiment being deemed a failure, Kawamura left the team. And that brings us on to the third build of the game, and this would be called... And this saw the removal of the hallucination mechanics, and the story was kept the same as Castle, with the main difference being that the main enemy type would be a zombie-like creature called the Dabbermen, and these would be controlled by parasitic organisms, which may ring a bell to the Resident Evil 4 final release where we saw the last Plagueis, except these would be a lot less human and a lot more zombie, similar to how we had in the original trilogy. It does make sense why they scrapped this, as they were trying to be a lot more different and more innovative based on what came before in the Resident Evil franchise at the time, so it made sense that they went with the last Plagueis style of enemy, and I think personally I'm glad they did, as it did add a lot to the horror element of the game with having these enemy types that were very human-like until you started to dig a bit deeper into their lifestyle and interactions just to realise how unhinged they truly were. But swiftly moving back onto the build itself, work began on this build at some point after TGS 2003 and was quickly halted by executive producer Shinji Mikami following concerns by the company that the game's sales would stagnate if it were too formulaic, going back to that point of having those zombie-like characters similar to the original trilogy opposed to the more humanoid enemy types. No designs are known from this version, and it is possible no physical work was accomplished before the idea was thrown out, but it's definitely interesting to look back at all these builds and wonder what direction Resident Evil 4 could have taken, and if it would have shifted the direction of the entire series. But with that said guys, that does sum up all the key prototype builds of Resident Evil 4. Let me know down below what you thought of these builds, and if you think Capcom should have kept some more of the aspects in these builds in their final release, and I look forward to reading all of your comments. Be sure to smash that like button if you did enjoy, and subscribe for a lot more Resident Evil content as we make our way to 10,000 subscribers. Don't forget to join our Discord, link is at the top of the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.